that forgiveness and conflict resolution are important to building strong family relationships, but they're not always easy. And often the obstacle is not the other person, but it's us. Today, I'm talking with Natalie McVeigh, founder of Oikonomia Advisory. Natalie is a family business consultant well known for bringing neuroscience into family communication and conflict resolution. Thank you for joining us, Natalie.
Thanks for having me, Kim. I'm really excited to be here. One of my favorite websites.
How do you resolve conflict when the other party won't even talk about it?
Yeah, the interesting thing about conflict, and there are different studies on this, but about 50%, I like to say 60% of the conflict is just us, right? So think about that. It's half or more is just my feelings about it. So imagine you did your workout this morning, you drank your coffee, you were having the best day in the world, and you're driving to work, right? We've all had this scenario, and some, jerk face cuts us off. We're gonna maybe shake our fist, maybe a different finger comes out, all of that. But that, jerk face doesn't even think about it, right? They were just getting to their exit quickly. They were poor planning. They actually didn't technically do anything to us as me naturally. They don't know who I am. Now it's hard to believe that's true in families, right? We're not some unnamed person on a random road. And so that conflict really has to do with our reaction. So we all have different traits, different skills and abilities, and they don't always make people happy. Like I'm really slow. So people interpret my slowness as I don't trust what they're about to do. That's not true. I just am really risk averse, right? And so the part of the conflict that's yours, or the part of the forgiveness that yours, is really getting to the source of why that bothered us. What about that pattern really gets us, right? Some people don't have the reaction of shaking their fist when they're driving. Some people don't have road rage. I don't understand those people, but they don't. Um, Same thing. Some people do not respond poorly when I'm slow because it works well with them. And so I call these little hooks. We're all walking around with these hooks. I think Captain Hook back in the day. And these hooks they're fine. It's when you get hooked, there's the challenge. But for anyone who's hooked you, so for people who talk to me like I'm dumb, that's my big hook. I really don't like to be explained to before someone asks a question or two. Bums me out. It's bummed me out since I was a kid. I could tell you all the stories about why or how. But if I just decide, Natalie, I'm going to not get upset when this person explains something to me, I'm going to inquire why why that's important to them. What about that was important? My hook has disappeared now. Their hook can still live. And I think that's one of the misnomers of conflict resolution or forgiveness. I want to unhook when they're going to unhook because everybody's got to put their guns down. It was never a gun to begin with, right? My aversion to having things explained to me like I'm stupid, that had nothing to do with you. I had it before I met you. And so the very first piece is we identify our hooks and really see what they're trying to protect. It's finding our hook and then deciding if our hook was actually protecting us or creating more pain in that relationship.
So, what role do we play, and you're kind of hinting at this, as individuals in perpetuating conflict?
Yeah, the role we perpetuate in conflict, and this is probably the wrong phrase for it, but think about the last injustice. Think about the last conflict where someone did you wrong. Probably it's your spouse or your kid or something that happened this morning. It's that present. Think about what actually happened, right? There's some research on that spanking is actually not bad for children. It's that we spank at the inappropriate time. It's not the time when they were actually being a pain in the butt. It's the last thing they did that was pretty insignificant, and then we spanked them and we spanked them too hard. I'm not telling you to go hit your kids. Please don't do that. But it's very similar, right? So in a world where I have porous boundaries, I have a problem setting up my boundaries, and you and I are our siblings and we're working together. And I don't tell you it bothers me that you constantly give me immediate deadlines because I want to be sure. But I meet a few of them too because I also personally like to perform. But by that fifth time that you ask me for a last minute deadline, I'm going to have my hook and be like, gosh, Kim keeps putting me in these impossible situations. But what I did to contribute to that is I didn't set up my boundaries early. I didn't let you know. I assumed that last behavior was about Natalie, but we're siblings. I've seen you my whole life. You create these fast deadlines for everyone. And so I think it's taking that one action, that isolated action. And the easiest thing to say is, if my best friend did this, And you want to use a real name of a best friend. And so I would say, if April did this to me, would I be as upset? And the reason it's important for our brain is because it anchors into that person and it brings that empathy, it brings that affection, it brings all of those things to the table. And more than likely, if April gave me a fifth last minute deadline in a week, I would either tell April that I can't do it, I'd feel comfortable doing that, or I would know that it's really important to April and that I could support her in this. And maybe that's not going to be our working relationship forever. The role we play in conflict is we assume that the other person on the other end is doing it to us. John Wallen has this great quote, and he says that we judge others by their impact, we judge ourselves by our intention. In most cases, when we study people, the intention isn't poor, but the impact is. And that's the difference.
In the beginning, you mentioned forgiveness. Why is forgiveness so important in a family business?
Yeah, forgiveness is putting a pin in this one thing. Some research says that in organizations, 90% of expectations go uncommunicated. In families, it's even more. We want to belong most to our family. Our brain is actually, the strongest urge is belonging, not safety. And where we most want to belong is our families. And so we sometimes make ourselves smaller. The more that I don't make jokes because you're the funny sibling, the more that bothers me, right? And you don't know that. The forgiveness part of this is actually a grieving process, right? If we think about the emotions that we have, sadness actually makes emotional space for other things. So if I can be sad that it's a silly thing to be sad about, but if I can be sad about not being funny and let that go at home, right? Because that's my brother's role, but I can be funny at work or in other places, then I can move on. Because my brother isn't being funny to take the air away from me. It's the way he copes in our family system. So part of that forgiveness is really, there wasn't an intention for that impact, and I'm not going to carry that with me, right? They're doing that to protect themselves. And so that forgiveness closes it. The interesting thing we do with forgiveness is we'll go and tell people, we had this conversation yesterday and I forgive you. Well, that's another way of sticking the knife in to say you were kind of a jerk. You don't need to tell someone you've forgiven them. You just need to show it behaviorally. And believe it or not, our beliefs follow our behaviors. So behaving as though someone has forgiven you, behaving as though you're not in conflict with someone, you actually start to believe it.
So what can we do to change our perspective?
You should absolutely tell your boundaries early and often. You want to say, we're about to have a hard conversation, Kim. Because what people do is that compliment sandwich thing of like, Kim, I love you so much. You're my favorite sibling, blah, blah, blah. So it feels like I'm hugging you. And then I'm going to say something that's tough. And so it feels like I'm giving you a punch in the gut while I'm pulling you in, which is just mean. So I think I would say something like, Kim, I think we need to have a hard conversation about boundaries and expectations. Are you ready for that? Now, you have to be okay if they say no. And if they say no, say, when can we talk about it? Right. And then you clarify the expectation. So I usually said, I think there's probably some feedback you have for me, and I want to make time for that. But for the purpose's sake, I would like to give you some feedback about some boundaries that I have been at fault in creating between us. Right. And I have, this is a real one. I am slow. And so although I can put something out really quickly, I like to know when the deadline is. And I like information at least a week in advance. But I didn't tell people that. And so that's what I would say to Kim. Now, one of two things can happen. Kim could say, screw off, you're my little sister, and I get to do what I want. But more than not, most people will say, I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. Now, what'll probably happen in that conversation is that person will want to know the date they can give you feedback to, because they're like, well, if you've got your list, I've got mine. The question that you asked about reframing, it is super simple and it's super stupid. It is just be curious, right? In a world where Kim's giving me these short-term deadlines or my brother is being so funny, what about that's important to them? What might be going on for them that has nothing to do with me? And so actually these clients, and they were a wealthy family that had created a code of conduct where you paid by the minute if you were late, and they paid $100 increments. And the one sibling, the sister, who implemented this rule, who'd never been late before, was late by like 30 minutes. And so they were like, money jar, money jar, money jar. Like they couldn't wait to get her because she was always the punctual one. And you could see her pallor was just a little off. She just didn't look okay. And she paid the money because it was the rule. And I just asked the room, we were having a shareholder meeting. I was like, is anyone curious why she was late? Her chin did the quiver, right? She was trying not to cry in the meeting. And everyone else was like, does it matter? It's her rule, blah, blah, blah. Because they felt tormented by her rule because she's always on time. And so they felt that she's been doing that to make them miserable, not doing that because that's how her organized their life. There was a car accident. Fortunately, she was unharmed, but there was a fatality that she was really close, not close to emotionally, but she saw. It's the first time she'd ever seen a fatality. And, there was a reason she didn't come. Now, it doesn't mean that she doesn't have to pay the fee, right? Like that's the rule. But to be curious about our siblings as though we don't know the truth. There's something in communication, in relationships, called the closeness communication bias. You're my sibling or my partner or my parent, and I love you so much that I just stop listening because I know what's going to come out of your mouth. It literally happens. That's why most facilitators literally just repeat what's going on in the room, and you can absolutely hear it. So if we actually are curious about why someone is doing what they're doing, and we ask that question, we can create, hopefully, if you think about Brene Brown, like a generous assumption for that. Maybe Kim is giving me these deadlines because she's overwhelmed. Maybe Johnny is cracking jokes because he feels uncomfortable having serious conversations. And if we create these 5 or 6 different possibilities, besides the fact that they just love tormenting me because they don't, you're not that important, we then don't internalize it as another data point for conflict, or a data point for their being aggressive with us, or they're taking the space that we should assume. It's called priming. Our brain organizes things in folders.
So, what final advice do you have? You gave us so much on changing perspective, asking for these conversations, the importance of boundaries and expressing them. What final advice do you have for these people who are struggling with this internal conflict, like you mentioned, which is so common in families?
I think the important word is complicit. We like to place blame because we like to negotiate from a position of I'm a good person, like that's our identity. And you are, and hopefully your family is too. Like we're complicit in creating that, right? We probably didn't set expectations. We assumed they knew us because we're family. We haven't given them the benefit of the doubt that we would with people that we have a larger affinity for, like I said, your best friend. And we've continued to write the story of problems instead of possibilities. And so it's easier said than done, right? You're not going to go and do it tomorrow. But if you pick one of those strategies, you're going to stop being complicit in it. And if nothing else, if you really don't feel like there's enough safety to ever assert those boundaries and have that conversation, you can still do a conflict coaching on your own, which helps you erase some of the conflict with that person going through that process of your hook. You can also find someone who's a skilled facilitator or mediator to work through that. And that extra person in the room is not related to you, not a part of the system. They will help you hear your sibling or your parent in a different light. But try to stop adding to those piles as soon as you can.
This was so incredibly helpful, particularly looking at it. A lot of times when we think about conflict resolution, we don't think about what we're doing to maybe create the conflict in our minds and to perpetuate it. So this was so helpful. Again, I'm Kim Edelson with FamilyBusiness.org and talking to the brilliant Natalie McVeigh. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thanks, Kim. It was a pleasure.